This is the September 20, 2016 meeting of the Tallahassee Ethics Board. We have a quorum present. Mr. Ojtayo is excused. I can't see that far. I'm calling us to order at 4:10, so we're running 10 minutes late. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. I believe you all got these or got access to them. They're fairly short. A couple of days ago, does anybody have any comments, corrections, additions, or does anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Ms. Phillips moves approval of the minutes.
Second.
Mr. Freeman seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. The minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is the Ethics Officer Report, which includes a couple of different items, which, again, were out on the website and you all have had access to. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As per usual, you've received a written report of my activities since the last meeting. Specifically, I just want to call attention to the fact that, wow, that slipped out of my head, that the chair at the last meeting had asked me to follow up on any potential gratuities, gifts, special recognitions that may or may not have been provided to city employees, i.e. linemen, emergency responders, as recognition for their service during the hurricane. And if those were received, how that would be handled. So I checked with a number of folks here at the city. Specifically, I did also speak with Ellen Blair in HR, and employees of the city are not to take cash or cash equivalents, so like gift cards and things like that, checks, cash, anything. If you're really happy with your lineman, he's not allowed to take money or a Sam's gift card. You're free to offer him an icy cold glass of water, lemonade, some cookies, something like that that's consumable, but no cash or cash equivalents. We've had no reports of anything like that going on, but you asked, and employees basically know the drill on that. And the city just in general has a limit of $50 on kind of promotional gifts that people may get as general employees. So I did follow up with that. I've also worked with Ms. Phillips, and we're going to talk more about that later in the meeting, with incorporation and integration of ethics into policies and procedures. I'm trying to think if there's anything else notable. I've attached the list of inquiries for the month that I have received. You have a budget, and we have a total of 21 campaign contribution refund requests that have been received and paid.
Okay. Just to disclose, and I'll be doing this a few times during the meeting, I did have a conversation with Ms. Meadows-Keefe about her report on calls or complaints that she's received, and we're going to suggest dividing that into categories when we do our self-evaluation so that we get, my thought is, and we'll talk more about this in November and December, that we ought to separately track with the most information those things that are clearly complaints that fall within our ethics jurisdiction. We then on a separate list or a secondary list track those things that are directly related to the city, that are referrals that she would make through the kind of hotline process, where we would get maybe a little less information. And in the third category, where we would need the least information, would just be those more casual contacts or contacts that have little to do with the city, but they're calls that come into her. Maybe it's something that deals with the State Ethics Commission, has nothing to do with the city, but not something where we need a lot of information, so that we have the ability to try to focus on those things that are most within our jurisdiction, and not spend a lot of time going down rabbit trails on things that really just don't have much to do with us, other than they took up Ms. Meadows Keefe's time. So that is something we will be talking about at more length, and y'all may want to start thinking about things like that for November and December, where we can try to help ourselves focus on our work and still be responsive and responsible as a board. The next item, unless anybody has any questions for Ms. Meadows Keefe on her monthly update. Okay, seeing none. The next item on the agenda is our ethics moment, which is going to focus, I believe, on transparency.
Yes.
Ms. Meadows Keefe, you are recognized again.
And I appreciate the liberty the chair has given me. Normally, I just give a few case studies for our ethics moment, but since this meeting is about transparency, it's actually a very important topic to me personally. And I've been waiting for this meeting to talk about that. I think it's super important. So, and I have the guest speaker that I'll introduce in a moment. But I want to clarify at the beginning, how does transparency relate to ethics? How are these things tied together, and why do they matter for our purposes? And I think between this brief talk and Ms. Lambert's presentation, you'll hopefully understand that. But I mean, we start with our charter amendment language, and it is referenced there in the charter amendment language that the public have confidence in the integrity and transparency of its government. So we hear over and over again that sunshine's the best disinfectant. And when people are conscious of the fact that their actions, their emails, their written documents can be the subject of public records requests and can be seen by the public, that within it actually enhances ethics. So it makes people mindful of what they're doing, what they're writing, what their relationships are. So that enhances ethics, and so our own charter amendment recognize that, and we're going to be fleshing out today exactly what transparency means. This is a quote from James Madison. So I didn't see Hamilton on Broadway when I was in New York this summer. I'd like to, but this is from Madison, and even back during the time of our founding fathers, it was recognized that knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. So the government is in Florida a source of information for citizens, and citizens need to avail themselves of the available information. So part of what we talk about when we talk about transparency is packaging data in ways that can be digested by the public. So we're not just dumping a lot of data onto a website, we're organizing it in a logical fashion where people can access it. So this is the perception of government that I think most governments are working against, that there's a culture of corruption and that things take place in the dark. And the purpose of transparency is to let light in to dispel these notions and enhance public trust. So Alexis is going to talk more about what transparency is, but this kind of touches on a few of those things, that you convey the information in a way that's digestible, easy to find, and that technology is utilized to the extent it's possible in your budget and in your technical expertise to put it in a way that the public wants. So maybe they want an app, maybe they want you to have an Instagram account, maybe they want to see pictures of all the potholes in the roads, and they want to be able to view that. So part of that is gauging the data that citizens want and getting that to them. So it's being data driven and assessing what the citizens want and trying to give them what they want. So that public engagement's important in making those types of decisions about what you're going to prioritize putting online. Transparency in Florida, we can think about some of our laws that are in place that enhance transparency. So those are things like our proactive disclosure when candidates run for office. It's the filing of our annual disclosure forms. It's those types of documents, and those are generally available online for the public to see. We have, as we've heard about, a public records law in Florida that gives people broad access to public records. And then campaign finance disclosure, people that donate to campaigns being able to find that, plus our open meetings law. So we see notions of transparency built into Florida law. So the hope is that all these components work together to make a more transparent government. And several years back, the legislature, I think, recognized this when they made public records and open meeting laws training required as part of annual ethics training. And it's not just in Florida where transparency is emphasized. My husband's in Suffolk County right now. It's where his mother lives. So I was looking at their government and happened to find that Suffolk County, New York has an ethics board, and this is their mission statement. I wasn't up late because I have no life. This was just a random search I did and found this, that their ethics board says to practice and promote ethical literacy and conduct through training, transparency, and trust. So I happen to be partial to our mission statement, but I think it's important to recognize that one board at least thought that transparency was a key component to its success in achieving its mission. Our mission is to promote the actual and perceived integrity of city government and to prevent unethical conduct before it occurs. Knowing government's transparent, knowing your documents, your emails, things that you do, sources of income that you receive may be public, hopefully has that preventative quality to it that makes people mindful of things before they do them. And I don't know if y'all have seen at the games now, when you go to Doak Campbell, you can't bring these Vera Bradley bags or your backpack or whatever it is. Everything has to be clear so that people can readily see in. So I always thought of this too. If you worked in retail, you always had to have a clear bag so that they can see what you bring into work and what you take out of work. So it's like that with our disclosure, that as a candidate and as a public servant, you disclose what you have, and then when you leave, you have to file one more disclosure when you get off. So they want to see what you're bringing in and what you're bringing out. Things that we have done to enhance transparency, we've done lots, I think, of things to promote transparency, but the one that I'll just point out is that we started broadcasting our meetings on WCOT in September of last year. So we've now been on the air for over a year, and we are on YouTube, and we'll actually look at that later on in the meeting when we look at the city's own website. There's some dark sides to transparency too. I've talked about data dumps, and that's the one category of, this is one piece of information I gave you in your documents. This is West Palm Beach. The communications director there, they apparently had this great policy that when a public record request was received and answered, that they were going to be nice and proactive and put it out there on the web for everyone, not just for the requestor. The Inspector General's office in Palm Beach County got involved, and it's actually a 41-page document because the same communication director had an issue where it looked like he might be doing a job on city time as a communications director. But the other thing he did is he released a public records request result on a website, and it contained information on things like confidential informants, law enforcement, undercover, social security numbers, all those things that will allow someone to steal your identity. No significant time was taken to redact. There was no legal review before documents were dumped. And one virtue Alexis brings to her job is that she's also a lawyer. So she processes the public records requests, bringing to bear experience as a communications person, also with the legal background. And that's something that was missing here. He thought just dumping data was a good, transparent idea, and really that was not a good thing for them. Finally, the other example I have is something that's going on in Chicago. There was some questions about whether aldermen should be taking advantage of a sweetheart deal to get nice box seats at Cubs games, and whether this was ethical or not. And gosh, we still have dailies in charge in Chicago, which I always marvel at. So they came up with some kind of solution where if you're an alderman and you're there in a box and you have your guest, you have to be publicly announced at the Cubs game. I'm not sure how this works, but before the team runs out or something, they're going to say, ethics board member Phillips is here in this fancy box, and she's brought her guest, Mr. Davis. And then they are ostensibly receiving boos and consternation from constituents. And so to kind of mitigate the ethical problem with the aldermen being in these fancy boxes, they are kind of incorporating some shaming techniques to deal with this. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Mr. Chair.
Whose idea was it to do this announcement? Was it the city's or was it the Cubbies? Do you know?
It was the ethics board's chairman.
Okay.
Yes, so they kind of, the city council members did not want to give it up. As you can imagine, right? I'm not a baseball fan, so I wouldn't care. But so
The value of those seats does vary from year to year, by the way.
depending on the playoffs, right? So I just felt that that was an interesting way to be transparent. That what better way to be transparent than to have yourself announced at a game. So with that, unless anyone has a question, yes, Mr. Friedman.
Yeah, has anybody queried the members of the commission to see if they're accepting free tickets to any events in town?
I don't know if the article says. I don't know
Do you
if
think that it might be appropriate to ask?
Sure.
Talking about our city commission?
Yeah.
Let's.
I mean, I assume that that's the lesson you derive from what you're talking about, is if it can happen there, it can happen here.
Well, let's first find out what, for the next meeting, what the city's policies
Yeah,
are, because that
that's
would be,
good.
that would be a gift. And I suspect that there are probably some gifts that can be taken and many gifts that cannot be taken, and a lot of things you have to pay for yourself. But I suspect much of that will be covered in policy without us having to go
In other words, some sort of
as
dollar limit, I
commissioner.
assume?
I don't know, but we'll get back on the policy. We'll have that on
Nice
our
to
next
know.
agenda.
Yeah.
Sure, that's a great issue.
I will follow up on that. And with that, I am going to introduce Alexis Lambert, and I have failed to put her bio where I can access it here in my notebook, but I do know that she has strong South Florida roots, and she is also, please do not hold this against her, a Gator.
It's nothing to hold you against. That's a plus.
And she has an adorable corgi named Justin. Alexis's background, though, in Tallahassee is several positions within the legislature. She was an adjunct professor at Florida State University, where I think you were teaching communications. children's classes. She also was deputy to Pat Gleason in the Sunshine office before she was invited about 4 years ago to join the city of Jacksonville. And the mayor at that time was opening up an office of public transparency and public accountability. And Alexis was given the opportunity to be the first director of that office, and she's responsible for, what did you say, 33,000 emails? 13,000 emails, and processing all the public records requests that come through Jacksonville. And she's going to share some of her experience, her strength that she's derived from that job, and some best practices that we may want to think about and discuss, and give us lots of food for thought as we consider this important issue. And I thank Alexis for coming.
Ms. Lambert, you're recognized. After what I'm sure was a completely inadequate introduction.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to try not to bore you to death with the PowerPoint. I'm normally ideologically opposed to them, but it was the best way to throw this stuff up on the wall and make it work. So when normal people talk about what they expect from open government, really big picture, they want to see where the money goes. Okay? Everybody hates paying taxes, but they know that it's one of the two things in life that they're required to do other than die. Okay? They want to know, what's in the budget, okay? What is this paying for? There's always, the popular mythology of the $600 hammers. They just want to see where it goes and what it does. 10 years is really the industry standard of how far back your municipal budgets should go, okay? Some people like to do comparative studies. Whether it's journalists or activists or people who are just interested in finance, it's just a good thing to have. You want your executive gift registry, contracts, journalists, activists, and a lot of times, especially people from out of state, like to look at contracts from Florida. Even if they're not coming to bid for your city's work, they like to see what other people who have won contracts for government work, what those contracts look like and what winning bids look like. And sometimes young startups in business like to see what winning bids look like when they're drafting their own business plans and are trying to make their way into the business world. Procurement information. They want to know how, where, when, and who. And their tax records. People shopping for houses want to see, what is this really going to cost me? Because, buying a house in Pennsylvania is a totally different story than buying a house in Florida. And moving from place to place, there are a lot of considerations. And maybe, there are tax advantages to setting up shop in one county in Florida as opposed to another. You want to put all that stuff out there so people can do their research. And when they come in to talk to the staff in your respective offices, they can ask fewer and more informed questions when they do. Infrastructure. People are curious about infrastructure, particularly issue-specific journalists or issue-specific activists. Okay, but one of the most important things that any given constituent from any given walk of life wants to know is about their trash pickup. Because if their trash doesn't get picked up, they will call your customer service line and they will raise Cain. Because if it was supposed to get picked up on Tuesday and it doesn't get picked up on Tuesday, they want to know when that truck is going to be there. Because there's nothing that drives people nuttier than late trash pickup. True story.
Hurricane.
Yeah, hurricane or no hurricane. There better be a real good reason why that truck wasn't there. You look through the archives of any city in America, that's going to be one of your top complaints, any given year. Okay. Access to humans is one of the most important parts about government transparency. Okay. One of the things we've done in Jacksonville that's helped a lot is having the mayor, the chief of staff, and the chief administrative officer's email available on an open portal. It saves a lot of time. We have some political reporters and some activists who just read their email on that portal. And sometimes they'll call in with very specific questions because they'll say, I read Mayor so-and-so's email on October 12th at 11:30 a.m. and they were referencing this deal. When is that meeting? And we can say, oh, that'll be discussed at City Council. Here are the agendas, and send them a link. City Council, meetings, agendas, records, all that stuff online. People can look at it. They can know, save the assignment editors some time. You need to be able to get to your media contacts within 2 clicks. Okay? And there needs to be a name. It needs to not be that amorphous, media whoever at, city.gov. People hate that. If they know that they need the person's name is Joe Smith at cityoftownsville.com, they like, it's so much better to be able to call and have it associated with a human. Okay? And phone numbers should lead to human contact within business hours. Think about all the times you've called some behemoth corporate entity and had to sit and listen to that recording. Even if it's a song you like, you learn to hate it within 90 seconds of listening to it while you're trying to change your cable, fix your internet, or get some other kind of service taken care of. Sitting on the phone with no humans and your problem, that's just sucking the life out of you, it's a really demoralizing experience. Example, Macon, Georgia, population 91,000. All of their open government contacts are on the front page of the city website. Okay, you can scroll down, boom. Your clerk of your commission, your clerk of the Superior Court, and your open records coordinator for the sheriff's office are right there. And right underneath that, you can watch their commission meetings live. Now, and it tells you what channel it's on, depending on who your cable provider is. And if you don't have cable, but you have internet, you can watch it on their website. That's a whole lot of access to government information in a very small town, okay? Town that's smaller than yours. Standards of modern conduct, big picture, okay? 10,000-foot view, dance like no one is watching, email like it may one day be read aloud in a deposition. Okay. There are no blurred lines when it comes to social media, okay? Getting on your Twitter account or your Facebook account and putting that this is a personal account, that doesn't immunize you from the consequences of what you do on your social media. This is one of my favorite e-cards because that's also my personal rule. If Jim Cantore is within 250 miles of wherever I am, I leave town. But for government practice or for being a government official of any kind, I like to call it, what is your Jim Cantore moment? What's the definitive crisis? And who's your Craig Fugate? Like, who is your reliable government subject matter expert that you can turn to, who's thinking in terms that are useful and relatable to people who are not in government? One of the most ingenious concepts that Craig Fugate ever came up with was the Waffle House Index. Okay, because people who don't work in government and don't work in logistics and don't work in crisis management know that, if Waffle House is closed, we're in really bad shape. But if Waffle House is open and serving a full menu, everything's going to be okay. And normal people relate to that. Whether or not they are waffle people or hash brown people or people who just like to eat, they can relate to to a popular Southern diner chain as a means of assessing crisis management. When it comes, especially when there is some kind of a crisis situation, right now, we've got some storms. Okay? Your lack of message discipline is what's deadly. Okay? If your constituents aren't getting clear, consistent communication from government, they're gonna get it elsewhere, and elsewhere can be a terrible, terrible place, okay, which is what has happened in many, many, many locations around the country, and I'm gonna show you some. Okay, 2012, Superstorm Sandy. Okay, it was a Category 2. Okay, as that was approaching land, New York Stock Exchange is closed. The DC Metro is closed. The UN is closed. It's we're 175 miles out from the eye. It's not even, it's like a post-tropical storm as it's hitting New Jersey, but there are terrible fires in Queens. There are horrible things happening to real people, up and down the tri-state area. And there are 3 reactors that are experiencing shutdowns during the storm, okay? 3 nuclear plants. So there are major, there are traffic issues, there are power issues, there are serious problems going on. There is another major problem of communication, okay? There is a Twitter account that is releasing fake news briefs on Twitter. Okay, because when your power's out, when your TV, when you don't have TV and you're not listening to the radio, because people don't listen to radio. There's a generation thing now. When people don't have their power, they usually do have data on their smartphones. Okay, and that's where they're going. They're going to Twitter, they're checking in on their internet. So we've got this Twitter account with a rather significant following. Breaking, Con Edison has begun shutting down all power in Manhattan. Okay, Con Edison is the main power company. That's like saying FPL has been shutting down, all power in West Palm Beach. No, that's enough to freak out thousands of people. Okay. Then it says Governor Cuomo is trapped in Manhattan. He's taken a secret shelter. Then it says the MTA has announced that New York City subways will be closed for the remainder of the week. All major lines are flooded and will require repair. Okay, very quickly, like these rapid fire fake news briefs. This guy was issuing this total nonsense fake news briefing on Twitter, but it looked legit and it sounded legit. Con Edison was not responding. They weren't taking to the internet fast enough. The MTA was not responding quickly. None of the government agencies were getting their message out quickly and appropriately enough to combat the lie, and this guy looked legit. Okay, this guy actually turned out to be a campaign manager for a Republican congressional candidate. Okay, so he had a lot of connections in political fields, and he was completely making everything up. But, he had a fake picture and a bogus name, so he was able to hide behind anonymity until BuzzFeed unmasked him the next day. So he issued kind of a half apology and resigned from his job, but that story made all of the major newspapers in New York, it made BuzzFeed, and it made the LA Times within 24 hours. Can you imagine what it was like to work for the MTA, to work for Governor Cuomo, to work for Con Ed, or any of those other agencies, while some guy is blowing up Twitter with a bunch of fake news? Now, who's the best at it? Cory Booker is your gold standard. Okay? He's a young, smart elected official, and he's very active on social media, and he uses it responsibly. Okay? He lives in Newark. He was responding to people who were tweeting at him personally. He invited people into his home when they were losing power. He was letting storm victims crash in his house. He had a generator. They were watching movies and DVDs. He was answering his Twitter followers who were asking for help and delivering baby supplies and food personally, driving around the streets of Newark to help people out. And that was the kind of headline that he was getting 3 days after Sandy. There are some people who would say, oh, but everybody loves that guy. He didn't get trolled the way, some other elected official did. Yeah, he did. But he also handled his trolls extremely well. Someone would tweet at him and say, you need to do a better job getting power back to my neighborhood, and he would say, understood. Or someone would say something, rude and borderline profane, and he would say, sincerely, God bless you. And just not, one of the most important things you can do when you are managing a social media account as an appointee or an elected official is not to feed the trolls. Okay, when the power's out, people take to social media and they want answers. Cory Booker, the person says she lives in this specific apartment complex. She has a 2-week-old baby. She needs help. He says, I can deliver baby supplies. DM is direct message, which means he had to follow her Twitter account, and then she was able to give an address. He drove baby supplies to this person's house. You want to talk about constituent outreach? That's engagement. And the narrative changed because he was out there driving around in his SUV delivering supplies to his constituents. We've also seen that in other cities, including this one. But it's a great way to change a very bad, very dire situation. In New Jersey, when this storm was taking place, it was very cold, and a lot of the complaints involved people who were in their homes with elderly people and children who were cold and needed different supplies than people here who were very hot. One of his trolls was from Ireland and tried to ask him something. Not everybody can get away with the Jay-Z reference, but Cory Booker was able to make that work. And not everyone is funny, but when you're funny, you're funny. Okay, so, and it's not just a thing for big states and big cities. You know, Austin, Texas, horrible wildfires, they lost 1,300 homes. I mean, that's brutal on a human level and on a government level. So the city made an investment in infrastructure, okay? They're tracking weather, virtual gallery for City Hall, tracking lost pets in shelters, tracking human services, flood and emergency closures, and a public art mapping app, okay? They talked to their constituents, they figured out what they needed as far as, their Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? Food, shelter, roof overhead. And, Austin, Texas has a definite weird streak to it. They're artsy, they're creative. Public art was something they really wanted too. They put it into an app because people do stuff on their phones all day long, okay? It was something that worked for them. Okay, Austin also has 790,000 people. It's a bigger city. Small town USA examples. Vallejo, California, 115,000 people, hit serious hard times. Not unlike a lot of other cities in the country, but these guys really, really, really just got hit hard. Lost their Navy base, went bankrupt. And it only took 8 years to go bankrupt. 40% cut to police staff, city services go down the toilet. It's a story we've heard before, but when you think about the human cost to a very small town, it was, it's tragic to look at when you see the numbers really laid out one after another. This is Vallejo, California. This is the best city police department website I have ever seen. You guys have got to look at this on your own time. They made an investment to make their police department look more like its neighborhoods. They needed to recruit, they needed to rebuild, they needed to reach out to their community and rebuild trust with their constituents. And they made these gorgeous YouTube videos about why people join their police force, getting back into community policing, why they believe in their neighborhoods, why they believe in their friends. I mean, this stuff is, like Oscar-worthy in terms of performances, but they also put a phenomenal wealth of information so that anyone sitting at home in their bunny slippers could flip through this and look for any kind of information related to not only law enforcement, but also their community. I mean, they were putting themselves out there as a community police department, and there was a big emphasis on the community side of that department as well. I mean, you look at this stuff, their online services are unbelievable. They put all of this stuff online. You can do a police report, you can report vehicles, you can request copies of things, senior safety scams. Look at this gigantic document library. You can look at everything from truck routes to taxi ordinances to homeless guides to crime safety tips for seniors. I mean, there's just a tremendous wealth of information here for any issue, whether it's related to the cop side of law enforcement or the community side of policing. You can go through there, and geek out to your heart's content, depending on what your issue is. And this is a small town with no cash, but they made an investment in this thing. And that's one city working on one priority. Like Lexington, Kentucky, 300,000 people-ish. They really wanted to make an investment in a quality of life dashboard because they were having some serious blight issues from neighborhood to neighborhood. So now they're able to analyze social and economic, environmental trends in neighborhoods, and because they smush together all of their city data in standardized formats. So you can go from precinct to precinct in town and look up the housing code complaints, foreclosures, building permits, and property values from place to place, and you can compare them with one another. So, the different colors reflect the number of code enforcement complaints. And you can look, from neighborhood to neighborhood. And you can see the trends over the years. They also did something that was really bright, which was the real-time traffic ticker for commuters. So people can wake up in the morning, go on the city's website, and see what road closures are scheduled for that day. So, maybe you work from home, maybe you go grocery shopping at that specific place on the other side of town, but you know some place is going to be closed from 8 to 4, so you don't leave the house until after 4. Or, you can make your travel plans accordingly. Maybe you leave earlier, maybe you leave later. You just stay aware of things at certain intersections because it's all there on the city's website. Individual cities can make individual choices. Depending on what your priorities are as a community. Maybe you want to focus on economic development, setting things up for small businesses to file and to look for open office space. Maybe it's support for low SES schools. A portal for your local teachers to say, my students in this particular class need shoes and crayons and request school supplies. Maybe it's support for food deserts. Like that housing map was identifying places with housing needs. Maybe that could show you places that are, need volunteers to help with sustainable gardens or some other kind of program. Each administration, administrations are going to change over time. Your elected officials are going to change over time. And each administration can make choices based on their priorities or what happens. It could be maybe a natural disaster influences one set of changes. Maybe an increase or a decrease in your tax base influences what you do. You can make your choices. New Jersey just started this new program in the last few months, which I think is brilliant. It's a text to 911 initiative. A lot of people, if you get stuck in, the sample video they showed was a woman stuck in a parking garage being chased by someone, and she can't make a phone call because the person would hear her, but if she can text 911 and say, I'm on the 3rd floor of the such and such parking garage, law enforcement can hear her and they can tag her based on the GPS in her phone. That's some pretty cutting edge law enforcement stuff. And all of this stuff is entirely doable. As far as modern priorities go, the more you make available online, the less you'll need to dedicate in the way of staff time for resources and production. And when you make the concerted effort to put as much of this information out there up front, you'll have more credibility when you have to assert that you need time to redact, or when you actually need production time. There are going to be times when you're going to need human eyes on documents or human eyes on records to redact confidential and exempt information, especially if you are a government entity that holds HIPAA records, that holds FERPA records, that holds risk management information. I mean, it's just a reality, especially some of your consolidated governments. You hold a lot of stuff. But in this sort of big data movement, when you think about what they're really looking for, they want to see where the money goes, they want to see staff trends, they want to see restaurant evaluations, they want to see business licenses. If you show them as much as possible of the big picture, when they come in and want something that's more micro-specialized and requires time for review and redaction, you're going to have a lot more credibility when you say, that's going to take 8 hours, and we're going to, that's going to require legal review, and it's going to be X number of dollars an hour, first half hour is free, and after that, it's going to be X number of dollars an hour, and we'll be able to have that ready for you, next week. They're going to be a lot less inclined to think there's some sort of conspiracy to deprive them of records. And when your citizens know what's going on as a general rule, they're less likely to trust cartoon characters on Twitter who are promoting bizarre rumors, particularly in your crisis situations. There are going to be natural disasters. There's going to be another one someday. Hopefully it'll be a long time from now, but it's going to happen at some point. And if there's, law enforcement situations of public interest, we can throw some salt over your left shoulder, but, the day will come. You think about when the police were going after the Tsarnaevs. There was a public trust in law enforcement. When the police asked the folks in Boston to stay indoors because they were hunting down those kids, people went indoors. And, law enforcement was able to find that kid hiding under that boat and bring him in alive. But it showed that the community was, engaged and able to trust their law enforcement. And if you breed an overall culture of trust, people are less likely to to listen to the weirdo guy on Twitter who's making up fake news briefs. And that is all she wrote.
Thank you, Ms. Lambert. Questions of Ms. Lambert? Well, seeing none, I have two for you.
Okay.
One, would you comment on an issue that seems to me to recur pretty regularly with government data, and that is people like big data. We're seeing a lot more analysis of big data and a lot more cool things being done with big data, but there also is a lot of pushback, at least on government data systems, with privacy. So there are things that you could do with government data systems where you could maybe put multiple systems together, but people are concerned that that is going to be an invasion of their privacy, and even if it means that they're going to get caught doing something that's illegal, it still is an invasion of their privacy because you haven't been putting those data systems together. How do you reconcile big data with privacy concerns?
Well, your conduct as a government official, the records that you make and you receive in connection with government business are public. You don't have an expectation of privacy with that information unless it's specifically exempted by an act of the legislature or a court order. But really, unless it's, if you're working for, a municipality or a state agency, you're to be operating under the assumption that every email you send is going to be read by at least one other person. And the data that you're creating as far as your research, and your work product is presumably public. There are agency-specific exemptions for specific types of work, and with procurement contracts and things like that, there are grace periods and certain subsets of data that are removed from public disclosure for specific reasons in certain timeframes. But I think a lot of people get into the privacy issue because they transact what is supposed to be private business on public email accounts and then want to invoke a privacy argument that way, and that is a problem of their own creation. If you're paying your mortgage on your government email account, that's really stupid, and you shouldn't be doing that. If you are engaging in your personal life conversations on a government email account, that is really stupid, and you shouldn't be doing that. If you're compromising your own privacy on a government email account, that's your problem, and you shouldn't be doing that. I don't know how many times we have to train people to keep their government life in their government accounts and their private life in their private accounts. I mean, it's, I compare it to the kosher diet laws. Keep your meat on one set of plates, keep your dairy on the other set of plates, and don't mix them. And keep your scandal off of all of your plates.
Okay.
But,
Part of your response leads me to my second question, and that is a concern that I've had over the years with redaction of documents. What is confidential and exempt from public inspection and copying changes every year. Every time the legislature is in session, there are bills to change, to classify more things as exempt from inspection and copying, and sometimes to declassify things. So if I am a record custodian and I redact a bunch of records and make them available, that redaction may not be accurate or legal a year from now. How do you deal with entities that have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of records that they can redact, but every time the legislature meets, they may have to go back and re-redact? I get some things, phone numbers, you just look for 10-digit strings of numbers, but there are other things, the daycare center where the child of the law enforcement officer or the judge goes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, which may be exempt. No computer's going to catch that, at least not yet. How do you deal with that constant need to revise a document or re-redact a document that's already been redacted?
Well, especially with things like personnel records, there's certain things that are always going to require human eyes. And, there's certain kinds of documents that you wouldn't put in a portal. when I talk about the big data, I mean things that are not going to be subject to redaction. Your budgets are never going to be subject to redaction. Your contracts are never going to be subject to redaction. Your big picture, big ticket items are not the sort of things that would be, your restaurant inspections, things like that. That's not going to be stuff that's subject to redaction. Your personnel files, you redact those up front, and then if you have an employee who becomes a member of a protected class later, they go to HR and say, hey, I'm a veteran of special forces, or, my husband is a, guardian ad litem, and now we're a member of this protected class. And you can go in and have your files appropriately, and you can go to the property appraiser and make the arrangements for your house to, not be on the website and things like that. It's doable. It takes a little time, but it's doable. And there isn't a magic software. There's very good software, but there will always be some element of this that will require human review, which isn't a bad thing. Humans need to review these things, and it's always a good idea to run it by legal.
Right, so in terms of entities, for instance, that I know several government entities have looked at, some of them have done this, taking public records requests that they have responded to and making those responses available to people. So there still needs to be some distinction between those public records requests that are things that are coming from big data and those public records requests that contain a lot of personal information, like on employees, that could be subject to change. And if you put that out, that response to a public records request out on your website, 10 years from now, that response may contain things that are now confidential that weren't when you made your public records, when you responded to the public records request. So you need, I'm gathering that it's appropriate to be a little circumspect in terms of things that you automatically want to disclose on an electronic format. You at least want to think about which of those you need to go back and review periodically.
That's certainly worth considering. Because some of the exemptions also sunset.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. Questions, comments, other than outstanding? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation and your trip over.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda is public comment on agenda items. So I have one card, but it is on something that's not on our agenda. That comes later, a little later. Do we have any public comment on agenda items? It appears not. We would move then into a transparency discussion concerning our website and the city's website, which this would follow. And this is kind of a lead into what I'm hoping we're going to do again in November and December, and that is make some recommendations for ourselves, things that we can do to do better, things that we may need to change in our bylaws, things where maybe we need a little help from the city commission, or things that we may want to recommend even get changed in the city charter. I don't know what the will of the group will be, but
Want me to go down and actually show parts of the city website?
Ms. Meadows Keefe, I was going to ask if you could do exactly that. And it's a perfect follow-up to the presentation we just had, to look at some things.
I'm looking at it right now.
Mr. Friedman.
And I think it's an interesting site, particularly going to our thing. Independent Ethics Board is right on the front page of the site. It immediately brings it up, talks about what it is we do, gives the charter amendment, gives the members of the board. Now, I noticed a couple of them, the chair and the assistant chair are underlined. So I'm going to click on that and see just what it tells me.
Are you on the ethics board site? Is that what you said, Mr. Friedman?
I am,
Okay.
yeah. And essentially all it has is a letter from former President Mangum appointing him to the board. I assume yours will be the same thing from the president of FSU, correct?
I've never been there, but I would assume so.
That's fine as far as it goes, but I wonder if there could be more. And by that, I wonder, do we want to have a situation where we can individually be contacted? At least somebody actually on the board, in addition to our paid ethics officer. Should there be someone who is a conduit? I don't know. That would be a personal preference thing in a sense, because you could wind up, developing some friend who every day would send you an email about this, that, and the next thing. And maybe we ought to have it through the ethics officer. I would tend to think that's the case. I'm just surfacing that as a possibility. I think it's a bad one, but yeah.
Okay, we'll have it on the list for next month, but that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm hoping we can discuss when we get to our self-evaluation next month. Ms. Phillips?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, but I think I do. That should one of our emails be on this list? I'm guessing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that's a possibility, but not one I would favor. I think that the reason you have an ethics officer is to be the contact person for all the stuff. However, another way of doing it would be to slap everybody's email on it, and there would go, everybody would have a chance to contact anybody in the public have a chance to contact anybody at the board individually. I'm not sure that that's a good way of funneling information. Organizationally, I think it's poor. You want to funnel through, in any organization, one, person who kind of rides point on something like that. I'm just saying that is a possibility, but I don't think it's a good one.
Mr. Chair?
Okay.
I do recall back when we started the board that this was a matter of concentrated discussion. And in fact, we did have a board member before we had our complaint process. He got a phone call at work about a complaint. So, in terms of revisiting that, I mean, that's obviously something the board can do, but we do have ethics@talgov.com, which is a nice, short, concise email address. And I think the consensus of the board at that time was that it was best for public records retention policies, for consistency, for your status as quasi-judicial officers, that any and all correspondence directed to the board, if you all receive it, you forward it to me so that it may be retained, and that you're careful about responding to individual inquiries from citizens, because it may at some point become an issue that you are called upon to adjudicate. So I think for many reasons we discouraged the practice of publishing email addresses for you all. Of course, in the era of Google, people can very easily find you. And I know there's been some occasions when board members have been contacted by members of the public, and generally all board members are great. I'm looking at a few of you now that say, hey, a constituent contacted me about issue X, Y, or Z, you let me know. And then we talk about whether you're going to respond to that person or what the best thing is. Sometimes it's a simple question they want answered. Sometimes it's a complaint, and at that point, that kind of needs to come through me. And I do think that's how most boards do things. They don't really want individual board members corresponding on issues.
Well, maybe one thing we could do is, if we have the generic address, is think about each of us being notified on anything that comes to that, so that rather than wait until the next meeting for you to raise an issue that got sent in, I would get an email notifying me that, this is out there and I can go read it, so that I can come to the meeting having had a little bit of time to digest and think about it, without putting me in a position of potentially responding. I know I've had several conversations with folks who are residents of the city of Tallahassee when I've been sitting in a fast food restaurant getting a snack. Somebody will walk up and say, hey, I saw you on TV, at which point I grimace, of course, but and then they'll tell me that something that they think about the city or about how things are working, and I try to absorb as much of that as possible, but not opine on it. A website contact could be very much the same thing, where we just have knowledge that information's coming in.
One thing I've noticed is that we don't get a lot of traffic on that ethics@talgov.com, and one of the things for the self-evaluation that I intend to bring up is more engagement and getting our information out there so folks can contact us, because most of the email I get at that address is spam. So I don't get a lot. Most people are contacting me directly. They find out who I am and call me or email me. I just did want to share that the city of Tallahassee
One more question.
has a
So we get a
Yeah,
break.
that'll go nice.
has a YouTube channel. We do not have our own sub YouTube channel. This would be something we could probably very easily do on our ethics board website. We could call out the videos of all our meetings and have them available if people wanted to sit and watch. And there's a link to every meeting. And for those of you that ever miss meetings, sometimes I've sent you that link. And like, for example, this meeting on September 22nd only had 22 views and no thumbs up or down or comments. Some of them have had more than that. We don't get a whole ton of traffic. On my own Twitter, I usually push out the link because I'd like other jurisdictions to learn from what we do. And in fact, COGOL, the conference I go to, they always notice that and they always retweet it. So hopefully other jurisdictions are seeing what our board does.
Okay. Mr. Friedman, for a follow-up.
Yeah, just quick follow-up. I noticed on our thing, the contact information, there's two separate phone numbers. One says,
Tallahassee's TV state.
one says interested parties may contact the board via email, which I assume is what you were talking about, and phone at number that ends in 8036. Then right below it, it says the ethics office manages a citywide ethics hotline. It gives all the stuff that could be, and that number is 8813. That's a little confusing, I think, to a lot of people. What is it? Which phone number is for what?
Well, one number is my number, and one number is the number of the ethics hotline, but we can certainly clarify that.
That would be good, yeah, that's it, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so based on this discussion, I'd like to encourage everyone, including myself, before the next meeting, take a look at the website, the city's website, both for the board and for the city.
Good looking
Because
site.
there may be things, I think the city has put a lot of time and energy into their website. There may be some places where we have questions. I know several people I talked to after the hurricane were going and looking at the map about outages, which I think was more a map that showed who had called about an outage rather than a map of which communities or streets or neighborhoods were without power. So I think maybe people thought it was something that it wasn't. But there may be issues like that we would like to comment on that are kind of within the general purview of better ethics and better transparency and better government in the city. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you look like you have a comment.
And I'll just point out, there is a tab on the city website that says Open Government, and you can explore there. But I think when Mr. Goad came to talk about the budget, and in the budget workshop, they did talk about this OpenGov software that allows you to engage with the city budget and make all these fancy different pie charts and graphs. And that's what Alexis was talking about in part, was seeing where the money goes. And then the city does also have its checkbook. I think that had been offline for a while, and then people wanted it back, so they brought it back. And you can actually even go on our board and see where we're spending money, how much Mr. Currington cost for the month, et cetera. We're always picking on Mr. Currington. But it's that kind of information, and they've concentrated, again, on the budget, because that was where the most citizen demand came. They wanted to know more about money. So do take a look at the website, do engage with it, and that can be part of what we talk about next month.
Does this page that you're on now, does it allow to a view of tracking back for any number of years? I know our presenter suggested 10 years was the industry standard. You can go, I know the state on, I think it's Transparency Florida. You can,
13.
I see 13.
okay, so you can look at individual years, but you not, if I wanted to pick one of those pie slices of the pie and say, I'd like to
Yes,
see
you
how
can.
it's
The
evolved
answer
over
is
10
you
years.
can.
Okay.
I just moved it back to fiscal year 2015. I'm going to move it back further now.
It goes all the way to 2012.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's got the.
So, but you can
pretty good
look
range.
at, you can look at individual years, but
Yeah.
is there, can you get one page that would say for half-cent sales tax,
Yeah.
here's how much it was in
Oh, I-
2012, 2013, 2014, 2015?
I'd
Mr.
need
Chair?
some time.
Oh, well, okay, that's the homework I just gave myself, is I'll figure that out by next month.
I think that might be good for Board Member McNeil, too, because I know she was at a lot of the budget hearings. She actually came, so your insight might be valuable to the board on how useful this stuff is and how the average person may be able to relate to it.
Because I know from my perspective, a number for a particular year doesn't mean anything out of context. If it's, when I see it over time and I see it hasn't changed, it tells me one thing. If I see it's grown 50% a year, it tells me something else. If I see it's slipping slowly a little bit every year, that
So you
there's
wanna
a
see
different
trends.
message.
The trends.
Trend, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Okay, so a little bit more homework for board members. All right, so that will be one of the things that we will be talking about. And again, the idea for November is for us to raise issues like Mr. Friedman's, should we put email addresses out there? We'll talk about those things in November, decide which things the board thinks are worth following up, and for December, we will either have written proposals that are drafts that we can vote on, or we will have legal opinions if we need them to see how far we can go, so that we have something in December that we could actually vote on as changes to make to our own bylaws, recommendations to make to the city council, whatever we come up with in October. So my goal would be that the November meeting be very blue sky, raise anything you want to raise, take us down any rabbit trails. If there's something you don't like but you think it's worth discussing, we'll discuss it. And then if as a group we think it bears following up, then we'll assign somebody, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, to draft something for us for December that we can vote on. Next on our agenda is the ethics officer's job description. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're on again. Or, I'm sorry, Ms. Phillips. I apologize.
That's okay. Julie and I met actually 2 months ago and worked on just updating the job description. So it was to take effect, I guess, October 1st or right after our evaluation, because we needed something to evaluate her on for next year. So it is in your notebooks, and I think this is the second time maybe we've seen it. I'm not sure. But it was some technical, and basically most of it was technical.
And I think Ms. Phillips was correct in recommending that the job description be signed by the chair, which it was. And another technical is that I sign off on it to signify that I've read and understood that document. So, and then, of course, we know Ms. Phillips is a master wordsmith. So I'm sure it's a much better document than how it existed before. So I think it was just for your information.
Okay. That being something we've already approved, and
Yeah.
I would suggest that as we do annual evaluations or annual reviews of any type, that we look at the underlying documents. So this would be something that would be up a year from now when we do another evaluation. This document would be up for review at the same time, I think.
Something else too.
Was that it, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, and Julie and I are meeting soon, I can't remember what date it is, to actually try to establish an evaluation form that specifically addresses each responsibility in the job description. So that's one of my to-do list items.
And I think that's this week sometime, so.
Okay. The next item on the agenda before the break is a report on policies and procedures regarding personnel and purchasing.
Okay, I met with Ellen Blair right after she actually presented here. Julie and I met with her and just discussed sort of, gave an overview of what our board does, what my responsibility assignment as a committee of one is, and what I guess Julie and I were hopefully that she would review some of her personnel specifically, policies and procedures to update them as it relates to our charter and whatever else she thought appropriate at the time. So she is working on that. Julie and Ellen are meeting again soon, and it was a very good meeting. She totally understands, and I've also had already talked to Reese about it and Rick Gonzalez as well. I met just before this meeting with Raul in purchasing and a member of his staff, and they plan on having several policies and procedures that are within purchasing sort of reviewed, updated before Thanksgiving. The ones that I'm trying to find my list now, I don't remember exactly where it is, but one was vendor policies and procedures. Of course, travel was another one. I can't remember, but there were 4 or 5 that they thought would be appropriate for them to look at and update. So that was really good. It was a very good
outstanding.
meeting.
Excellent.
Right, another issue we discussed while we were in the meeting was the investigators, because there'll certainly have to be request to establish investigator to determine, that we already have a list. And it appears that the city already has a list of investigators that they can call upon, and I think it was 10 roughly individuals that they can call upon. And so we were discussing, well, is it appropriate to use some of the ones that the city's already approved, blah, blah, blah. And what it came down to, and I'd certainly love your opinion on it, if the city, and they're actually going to check this, if the city has not engaged one of these investigators already, or like within the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever, certainly there would be no, and they qualify per our responsibilities and what the skills we wanted for an investigator, then I didn't see any reason why we couldn't put them on our list. They've already been pre-approved, so go forth and do good if we need them. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sounds great to me. I mean, if they meet our qualifications, sure, why not?
Okay, good.
Okay, well, then I'm going to ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe if she would check that point, whether what we have looked for, which would be mostly Mr. Friedman's work, about what we would want in the way of an investigator, whether the city's process for identifying people appears that it would meet those requirements. And if you would get back to us at the next meeting, then that would be great.
Do you mind if I have questions, do you mind if I reach out and speak to those individuals about their skill set if I have questions, or how would you like that to work?
I think it's a good idea. We ask someone a question, they're not going to lie to you, I hope.
I would hope not. And then if the board were to need an investigator, hopefully that person would come to a meeting and then you all could engage with that person before making a selection. But the only concern I have was not a conflict of interest, but just making sure that those skill sets line up. A lot of the city investigators, their jobs are to do surveillance and make sure the workers' comp person isn't rappelling down the DoubleTree on the weekends. So those skill sets can be different than the investigations we may need. So I just want to make sure that there are at least a few that have those skills.
It would be interesting just to get a baseline on how many are close to our qualifications or meet
Right.
them.
We'll do that
See
for the
if we
next
have to
meeting.
perhaps look at our qualifications and modify them a little bit to accommodate what's already there. Anything is better than reinventing the wheel.
Right.
So I'm wholly in agreement that we do
And
something like that.
I would put then on the agenda for part of our self-evaluation, how we select an investigator if we're in a situation where we're time critical. It may be that we don't have an intervening meeting of the board. Does that become a decision of the board chairman, or does that go to the committee of one who has the most investigative experience to make a decision? I would be very comfortable with a delegate, making some of those kinds of delegations so that we can make sure that this board can operate in between meetings efficiently and quickly when it needs to.
An aspect of transparency is being able to react quick enough to be relevant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just real quickly, I want to make sure that everybody understands, with the Committee of One policies and procedures for the city, these are not things that will come before us because they are the city's policies and procedures. We're just working with them to make known, what we do and the importance of having some of the language maybe in their policies and procedures. However, I did ask them that when they do adopt these policies and procedures and add ethics issues, that just let us know so that we can just report back to you. That's all. So.
Yeah, to be real honest, that's the role I would hope that this board is going to be, we're going to be the most effective. In an ideal world, we'd never have a complaint because everyone would operate ethically, and I think the city's already going down this path, and by the way, thank you to all those city folks who've made themselves available to many of us so readily, that we just, help them stay the course and give them appropriate kudos when they do that. Okay, with that, we are going to take a 15-minute break.
You have a question.
Oh. on the clock. I'm going to jump to item number 13, public comment on non-agenda items. I have a card from Mr. Hollifield. Dr. Hollifield, excuse me, who would like to do a presentation. I believe he has some paper.
Correct.
If Sir, if you give that to me, I will pass it out.
We wanted me to see their interaction, how they communicate.
That's okay. I always eat with my son after this, so it'll be fine. Thank you.
He was right.
And this was not, obviously not on our website, since we're just now getting it to Ms. Meadows Keefe to make sure that it is appropriately distributed or made available, as the case may be. Mr. Hollifield, Dr. Hollifield, I'm sorry, you are
That's okay.
recognized, sir.
All right. Ed Hollifield, Longleaf Court. The first thing I'd like to say is I really enjoyed that discussion earlier today on transparency. You know, I think everybody should hear that. It's a very important discussion. This is sort of the diversion, but if you looked at the paper today, you saw a huge article on a meeting that took place that was by invitation only that involved city officials. And that simply should not be. These meetings, they get around the sunshine, but narrowly. But you shouldn't have people like, you know, the CRA showing up and commissioners showing up. And the meeting is not even noticed publicly. It's by invitation only. And that whole Urban Land Institute meeting at first was going to be at a private law firm in which the public was going to be excluded. And that was changed after I raised holy hell about it. And even in regard to CRA meetings where they give away millions of dollars, I've complained over and over again that those meetings are not broadcast. And they should be broadcast. They really should. I think that's something for ethics to pick up. The CRA meetings where they give away millions of dollars, including thousands to people like Ron Sachs, and he doesn't even need it, those meetings should be broadcast. They really should. But I came here to talk about something else. Tallahassee Memorial. Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. Your hospital, your hospital for life, fat chance. A lot of people don't even know, talking about transparency, they don't know about the $1 a year lease agreement between the city of Tallahassee and Tallahassee Memorial. I've mentioned that before. This is an obscene, racist lease agreement. Lease initiated in 1979. The city owned the hospital. City owned the hospital. It was built in 1948. It was built with a utilities tax. Black people had to pay the tax to build a hospital, but blacks were excluded from the hospital. TMH would rather a black person die rather than be admitted to the hospital. But even today, and a lot of people don't realize it, probably the Ethics Commission doesn't realize it, the city owns the land, the buildings, everything inside the buildings. Today, as per a lease agreement signed in 1979, June or thereabouts, the city doesn't know exactly when, which I thought was rather amusing. So the blacks paid the utility tax, couldn't go there, denied admission after the hospital built in 1948. TMH didn't care if blacks lived or died. Unlike Archibald Hospital in Thomasville. My dad had a serious surgical problem. He couldn't go to TMH. He had to drive to Archibald. But Archibald was a little bit different, because Archibald was racist, but not quite as racist as TMH. Archibald would admit black people, but then they would send them to a segregated ward. But that was better than TMH. TMH would just let you die. So Archibald was like apartheid South Africa. TMH was like Nazi Germany. But the city has financial oversight as per the lease agreement. The lease has been effective for 37 years, yet they haven't been audited during that same 30-year period. The city has access to TMH finances. When they pay Mark O'Brien $1 million a year, the city could ask them about that. But they don't. City has control over the board members. The board has to be vetted by the city. But the city has completely relinquished this responsibility. Take the last time around, they had 3 or 4 board members the TMH recommended. When they came before the city commission, they were all approved by consent. None of them were even discussed. You had Kelly Dozier added to the board. That was after her husband, Laurie Dozier, had been on for 9 years. 9 years Laurie had been on the board. And I guess maybe they were trying to avoid some of those obvious conflicts with Mad Dog Construction, because Mad Dog does a lot of the money for does a lot of the work for TMH. So Laurie's on there for 9 years. He comes off, and TMH responds by putting his wife on. Meanwhile, there is not a single majority black census tract in the city of Tallahassee that has a TMH board member. I repeat, there is not a single majority black census tract in Tallahassee that has a TMH board member. And the city is supposed to be vetting the board. I mean, think about that. Even the few blacks on the board, they come from what, Golden Eagle or Ox Bottom or whatever. None of them come from a black census tract in the city of Tallahassee. So I said the whole board, gave that presentation before the board. I said they ought to all resign because they're illegitimate. And they don't really deal with the needs of the community. TMH, they have to submit something called a community needs assessment to the IRS to justify their tax status. But guess what? TMH talks about what it's not going to do for the community. It was the most bizarre document I've ever seen. I should include, you can get it online, the community needs assessment for Tallahassee Memorial. They talk about what they are going to do. They say we don't deal with poverty. No, poverty is off limits. We don't deal with sexually transmitted disease, but that's all you got in Leon County. We don't deal with HIV. We don't deal with AIDS. We don't deal with gun violence. We don't deal with any of this stuff. We don't deal with, unplanned pregnancies. They talk about everything they don't deal with. And yet we maintain this obscene $1-a-year contract, with the city. And what I think some of this maybe skirts legality. TMH is now saying we don't want people on Medicaid. You show up in the emergency room, of course they have to see you because that's federal law. But we don't want people on Medicaid. If you show up in our family practice program, we aren't going to see you. These are Medicaid people. If you show up for internal medicine with our TMH partner, Southern Medical Group, we aren't going to see you. I don't even know if this is legal. And if it is, it's certainly not moral. Not for a not-for-profit hospital. And they ain't going to accept people. They ain't going to accept you if you don't have no money. But you're saying even if they have Medicaid, you aren't going to see them? And the city lets you use the land, the buildings, and everything inside the buildings, which according to the annual report is worth $600 million a year. The city is going to let TMH use that for $1 a year? I mean, really? I mean, I can't think if the ethics board doesn't have a role to play in this, I don't know what ethics should be doing. I really don't. But when you look at the outcomes in Tallahassee, when you look at life expectancy, if you look at Robert Wood Johnson, life expectancy in Leon County is worse than it was 6 years ago relative to other counties in terms of health outcomes. They pay Malcolm Bryant more than $1 million a year, yet they tell poor pregnant women on Medicaid, with no money, if you want a prenatal breastfeeding course, we're going to charge you $35. If you want prenatal infant CPR, we're going to charge you another $35. Well, those courses should be free. How are you going to charge a poor mother, pregnant, she about to have a baby, and you're going to tell her, we ain't going to let you take this infant CPR course unless you give us $35. Yeah, we let TMH use $600 million worth of property for $1 a year. It makes no sense. And it's immoral. And it's unethical. So I think this ethics board needs to look into some things. Number one, is it legal for them to turn down people on Medicaid? You show up in the family practice program, is it legal for them to turn down people? And when you go to the TMH, so-called TMH partner, Southern Medical Group, is it legal for them to say, if you're on Medicaid, we aren't going to provide any internal medicine services? And like I said, even if it is, it's not moral, it's not ethical, and it violates the spirit. If you're going to have that lease agreement, and I think it should be terminated immediately, it certainly is not in the spirit of the city providing needed services to the citizens and making sure that TMH has a representative board of directors, which it does not. Now, I made this presentation before the TMH board. I was surprised by the response when I told them they should all resign. I thought they were going to call security, but actually, the chairman was fairly receptive. This Susie Bush something. She said, yeah, this problem, the hospital got some problems. Really, we need to look into some of this. I was shocked. I was really shocked. But I dare say most of you don't even know about that lease agreement, because when I first mentioned it to the city attorney, he hadn't heard of it. That's been in effect since 1979. I suggest you read it. I think the ethics board should read the lease agreement, and the TMA should be audited. And that the board, the vetting process, none of this should be by consent. These individual board members need to be questioned, and you shouldn't have the country club type board of directors with no poor people, no people on Medicaid. It's basically a country club board. There's no way that that's consistent with fair representation of all of the citizens of Tallahassee. And I'll be glad to entertain any questions. I hope you have some questions.
Dr. Hollifield, I'll tell you, I have read the lease agreement. I asked Ms. Meadows-Keefe several months ago to get it for me, and it poses an interesting issue for this board because there are policy decisions that were made a long time ago that certainly we as individuals might disagree with. There is a contract out there, and it is what it is. I think the facts you've cited are as I understand them, are true. We have one of our biggest issues is that our jurisdiction is incredibly narrow. It is the city charter says that our jurisdiction is limited to what's in the city ethics ordinance, and the city ethics ordinance is a page long, Julie? Page and a half, maybe, double spaced. I'm not sure how much, so let me do this, and I'm going to ask for questions in a minute, but the thing I will commit to you to is over the next month, I will work with Ms. Meadows-Keefe to figure out what is in your paper here that is even arguably within the scope of our jurisdiction. I'm not going to tell you that I don't agree with you on a number of points, but what the board can do is something different than my personal feelings on lots of things. So that said, questions of Dr. Hollifield?
I'd like to make a statement. First of all, I agree with you. I think that anyone in this city who takes a look at the obituaries and looks at the minority ages of the folks who die as compared to the ages of Caucasians will note that there is at least a 10 to 20 year difference consistently over months and years. What that indicates to me is somehow our public health system, of which the hospital is a part, is not doing its job. That said, I believe firmly that much of the fix for this is strictly political. And that is unfortunate. I don't know how much this board can do. You guys can research it better than I can. But what I will tell you is this really needs to be, discussed in the Tallahassee Democrat. It needs to be discussed by the commission, because they need to re-examine an earlier decision that was possibly made on less than the best of motives, frankly, and reassess just where we want to be on this. Thank you. That's all. I just wanted to say that. I think it
Can I
needs to be
comment
said.
on that very briefly?
Sure.
Hollifield, you're recognized.
In 2004, I wrote a letter to the Democrat in which I indicated that black infant mortality in Leon County was 53% higher than the state average. And this wasn't even compared to white infant mortality. This was which the discrepancy would have been even greater. I said that the disparity, black infant mortality relative to the state average was 53% higher. This was 2004. And the city wasn't talking about it, and the county wasn't talking about it. Whole Child Leon hadn't even come into existence. Healthy Start wasn't talking about it. The state of Florida wasn't talking about it. Nobody was talking about it. And if you look at the situation now, look at prenatal care, for example. 25% of black pregnant females in Leon County receive no prenatal care during the first trimester of pregnancy. 25%. But that's worse than it was 5 years ago. 5 years, it was 20%. But what happened? The Leon County Health Department doesn't provide prenatal care anymore. They just cut it out as if the problem had gone away. They don't provide primary care anymore. They just cut it out. FSU College of Medicine was supposed to be the panacea, to all of this. But they won't even support the Medicaid expansion. So, when you got 47,000 people, when you got organizations like CarePoint and Big Bend Cares that move into the black community getting $1.5 million of tax assistance, say we're going to put a 28,000 square foot building in the middle of the black community, but we ain't going to see them people in the black community if they don't have health insurance. It's an insult. It's an insult. And that's happening now. That Big Bend Cares, that CarePoint, whatever you want to call them, that's going up right now. And they aren't going to see people unless they have health insurance. And they get money from United Way. So, you can't have it both ways. You can't say you want to be transparent, in the public interest and, all this kind of thing, and representing all of the people in the community when these kind of discrepancies exist, financially and morally. There's no way to make it square. Anybody else with any questions?
Questions?
Thank you.
Dr. Hollifield, thank you. Appreciate it. And your advocacy is vehement and consistent over time. I will applaud you for that. You've been at this a long time.
Thank you.
Okay, item 11 on our agenda is, and again, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, this will become a public document, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Revision to bylaws regarding counsel to the board. We had a simple change. This is our second look at this, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. This merely says that Mr. Currington doesn't have to be at all of every board meeting if we are going to do some stuff that where we don't think we're going to jail, we don't need him, I think is the gist of it. So, would anyone like to move this for approval?
I'll move it be approved.
Okay, Mr. Friedman moves, second.
A second.
Motion to second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. It is approved. The format for November and remaining meetings. Now again, November, December are largely self-evaluation. I will tell you two things on my mind about this, and then I'm going to let Ms. Meadows-Keefe talk a bit. One is I'm going to ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe if she will talk to the city's appointed officials to see if they have comments related to our self-evaluation that they would like to either make or relay through her. I would be very interested in, I know all three of them have attended numerous of our meetings. They may have insights that we don't have, or they may be willing to say things that none of us are willing to say, critical or otherwise. I think that format or that feedback would be important to get. The other thing that we will need to address is the filling of vacancies. Two issues have occurred that I want to put just on your radar. One is 4 of us are appointed by specific appointing authorities that are named in the city charter. We may have, either in the immediate future or the long-range future, issues where one of those where a term ends and one of those appointing authorities does not reappoint in a timely fashion. So we need to think about what we would do in a situation like that. I don't think we want to be in a position where we're operating with only 4 or 5 people. So I did ask Mr. Currington if he would look at the issue and be willing to advise us on the issue of whether or not we could have, say, a bylaw that would allow us to retain someone past the end of their term if the appointing authority had failed to act to reappoint or to appoint, to refill that vacancy. The other vacancies that occur, I guess only Mr. Davis and I were here when the original 4 of us had to pick the 2 members that the charter says, the 4 appointed by named authorities. Those 4 people picked 2 other people. When we had one vacancy come up previously on one of those people, we decided to, as a board, to reappoint that person. I am fine with that process, but that's something that probably we ought to talk about, and I would point out that I think Ms. McNeil's term expires the end of this year, so it will be a timely discussion. I'll just give you my 2 cents worth that I think it's fine for the board to simply reappoint either of the 2 people, since we have a two-term limit anyway. But if anybody wants to do anything different than that, next month would be the time to speak up. So those 2 items out of the way. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, if you want to talk to us about November and moving forward, please, ma'am.
Excuse me,
Oh,
may I just
free.
address what you just talked about?
Certainly.
It was a distinctly uncomfortable feeling knowing that we had no procedure to determine whether or not I'd be reappointed. And in point of fact, I guess at this late date, I can say that I missed the, what was it, December or January meeting on purpose because I was coming up and didn't want to, be part of what didn't seem to have any process at all. And I think for Ms. McNeil's benefit, we should have a process in place so that she knows exactly what's going on.
Okay.
I think it's only right.
Okay, we will have something for you. I'm kind of thinking maybe that person recuses themselves from the vote about whether or not to retain them. Well, one tells us whether or not they'd like to be retained, and we probably want to have something in there that will ask the person if they don't want to be retained to give us 60 days notice or something, so that we can have time to seek applicants and that kind of thing. We a few technical things we'll put in a short bylaw or policy, whatever is appropriate. We can have that for the next meeting. Okay, back to you, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Well, I do want to just hit a few things real fast before I go into the discussion. First, with the continuation of a term past expiration when the appointing authority does not timely act to reappoint. The city attorney, I have spoken with him already. Mr. Currington, this is for your benefit, that I asked him what he thought would be the appropriate vehicle to allow that kind of person to just sit until the appointing authority acted. He has no problem with it being a bylaw. I wanted to kind of know from him ahead of time whether he thought it needed to come before the commission or whether we could effectuate that through bylaws. So just so you know, you don't go any particular direction in your research. I know you always do your own independent research, but if you agree that it's a bylaw, you're not going to get pushback from him. So I've already had that part of the discussion.
The one thing I'd like to lob in there specifically for Mr. Currington's thought is that if we had somebody like that was supposed to be appointed by one of the four named appointing authorities, their term had expired, and we did allow them to continue until the appointing authority acted, it might be wise for us in the bylaw to say that that person would be excluded from decisions of guilt or innocence in the case of a formal ethics complaint, so that we don't get due process pushback. I don't know if that's the case, but that's the one concern that I would have. I would think all of the other board activities, even acting on in a probable cause role, would probably be okay. But I would have that one concern. Back to you.
Awesome. Okay. And I believe that in the bylaws, for the process of the board-appointed members, there is an existing bylaw for that. And I don't know if we put that in place before your term expired or after, but it's on page 2. It's vacancies and removals. It's Article 3C, and it's C2. And it says, for board-appointed members, 90 days prior to the expiration of a member's term, the ethics officer shall inquire if that member wishes to be reappointed and will remain eligible for reappointment. And so I have inquired of Ms. McNeil, just so you know, and Ms. McNeil has indicated willingness to continue. The next piece of that is, if the member is eligible to serve and wishes to be reappointed, the member may be reappointed by a majority vote of the remaining board members. So I guess that board member does not vote. The majority will then rule on whether that board member remains. And then if the majority of the board vote not to reappoint, we then take applications as we've done in the past to fill the vacancy. And that member that the board votes not to reappoint can actually reapply. I'm not sure why they would think they'd want to do that, but they can. And that if they want to try to be reappointed, they wouldn't have to actually fill out another application. So I do think we handled that. If you want to reevaluate that, that's obviously something you can do, but we do have a process.
Well, obviously, the board is smarter than me. In terms of our bylaws, the one thing I would say that we need to add is B says if the board doesn't reappoint, then you would seek applicants, but it doesn't say that you would seek applicants if the person says they don't want to serve a second term. I don't think it's in there.
Okay.
So with that, we need to just make, there's two reasons you would seek applicants.
Got it. So we can add that in there, that if for example, Ms. McNeil had said no, I would have then just reopened the applicant pool as we've done in the past, and those would have come before us. The other thing, now that we're talking about this, that we may want to think about, and the board chair and I have thrown around, we don't have to talk about it now, but for your contemplation, if the board was throwing open the applicant pool, would this board wish to interview potential board members, or are you satisfied with simply looking at the applications, having the dialogue like we've had in the past, and making a selection? So as you're ruminating over that, think about whether you'd want to have an opportunity to have maybe the top 3 vote getters come and actually engage with the board and answer questions. So we don't have that. We might want to do that. Moving on to the contents of this rather intimidating notebook that was provided, I want to just walk through the notebook with you real quickly. The board chair and I, and I'm sure he'll embellish this at the end.
There is a table.
Do you have the notebook?
Yeah, no, I was just pleased to find there's a table of contents. That's great.
Well, you can thank Lucy Atkins for that. I asked her to put this together, and she did a superior job. You know that I am a mission geek. I state the board mission at every opportunity, and if I had an ask of this board, it would be to be looking at the materials with an eye towards that mission. And if you like the mission, and I think the board likes the mission, to think about recommendations in light of the mission and how you give legs to the mission. So if we are wanting to promote the actual and perceived integrity of city government and be a preventive mechanism for violations, how are your recommendations giving legs or measurable steps to achieving that goal? Also thinking of a vision statement. So a mission statement kind of tells you what you're doing daily. A vision statement is your blue sky, like if everything was completely perfect and we did everything right, this is what we'd like to look like. So it gives you something to shoot for. And like in my brain, and you guys are obviously free to discard anything I say, something like to be the model ethics board for municipalities of our population size. Something like that. That's something I've thought of that I would like to see, that people look to us to see a new board, how it started and how it's modernized, as opposed to boards that have existed for other periods of time. We are rather new on the block. And how we're doing at fulfilling what the citizens wanted. Okay, so we're not going to sugarcoat over the fact that there was some just real nice, vehement discussion about that at the beginning. We'd like those same stakeholders to come and take a look and see how we're doing, and we hope public comment will be good, and there'll be a lot of participation at that meeting. So the vision statement is at the beginning. Then you have a citation to the ethics code. And that's that provision we've talked about before, where the ethics code in 112 sets a floor for what conduct is required of public servants, right? So that is the bare minimum that citizens can expect. 112.326 basically gives the authority to municipalities and counties to have higher standards. Right? So that's what allows us to exist. And then there's some additional explanation of that. So the next thing I've included, well, it's not the next thing in the notebook, but there is the ethics code contained in the notebook. And it is the 112.313, I think that, yes. That gives you the basic violations that exist in the Florida Ethics Code. So you look at those and say, I'm satisfied with that standard, or I'd like to go higher. The next thing contained is our...
Julie, let me point out that there are other provisions in statute that relate to public meetings and public records.
Correct.
Beyond what's in 112.313. So
Right.
When you think about ethics, think not only about the behavior of people in terms of like misuse of position or whatever under state law, but also keep in mind, and the statute on ethics training requires that it cover not only the ethics code, but also public meeting and public record requirements. So don't constrain yourselves as you think through this to just the ethics code. Also be thinking about the public meeting, public record part, which is the really big piece of transparency.
Which is what we talked about today. So any thought explosions you may have had, ideas you may have had during our dialogue today, those are also appropriate. But in terms of what we've talked about with wanting to beef up our city ethics code, it's important to familiarize yourself again with what 112.313 requires, and we did have that legal opinion that talked about concurrent jurisdiction with the Ethics Commission. So for us to be able to have violations to adjudicate, we'd have to adopt some additional provisions. So what you also have is,
So I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt here.
that's okay.
I think the path you're taking us down is here, or the path you're implying is that if our jurisdiction were expanded, it could be in one of two ways. One would be in a way that is concurrent with the State Ethics Commission, which of course then raises the issue of who gets first bite at the apple. And the other way would be that there would be stricter ethics requirements for the city of Tallahassee, and that our jurisdiction would expand only into those components that are stricter than the state law, so that the state commission would do state law, and then we would do that extra slice where the city had imposed additional requirements. So there's really two different ways of looking at an expanding jurisdiction, if that's something somebody wants to raise. Am I correct?
Yes, you are saying that correctly, and if I wasn't completely clear, there are some jurisdictions that have adopted the Florida Ethics Code by reference in their local ethics code. Now, keep in mind that anything that's recommended in the way of an ordinance or in addition to the city ethics code has to be passed by the city commission. So, you think about arguments that they may have, that they may be uncomfortable with two venues potentially of being prosecuted. And we've already had one opinion about concurrency. So that's a little more complicated. So the most straightforward thing for you to think about is looking at, for example, I've included our own Tallahassee Ethics Code, what we've got, that's there in the notebook. Then behind tab 1, we hear a lot about Jacksonville. The city of Jacksonville's been a model, so I've included that. Likewise, Seminole County, Florida, Miami Gardens, Florida. I'll point out that these particular provisions were mentioned in a city commission campaign by someone running for city commission. They thought that these particular provisions about donations from lobbyists and city vendors ought to be prohibited. So that was discussed during the election, and it was actually brought to my attention by a member of Citizens for Ethics Reform to take a look at. And I've actually been in contact with the city of Miami Gardens to see how that's been working for them. And I've had some discussions with the city manager, still waiting to talk to their city attorney. I will note this was passed prior to Citizens United. So that's included for you. Palm Beach County. We know that Palm Beach County in 2009 was the capital of corruption, according to Time magazine. So we may want to look at those provisions and see what they've done to rehabilitate themselves, and they've done a fairly good job at doing that. Similarly, there are provisions from Orange County and the city of Tampa. These are just provided for you to look. We don't like to reinvent wheels here. I would just like for all of you all to take a look and highlight 3 or 4 things that jump out at you that you think might be a good idea for this board to consider in beefing up the city ethics code. And be prepared when you come to offer those, and then this board chair is going to lead a robust discussion of what the board's priorities should be. And I'd emphasize this is not only a public opportunity to engage, but this is your opportunity. If you've been to a city commission workshop, they sit and they talk about ideas, and they have kind of a free-flowing discussion and set priorities for certain things that are important to them. And as ethics officer that's been here the whole time, it's my view in trying to direct you a little bit that this is the time to do that, that we stood up procedures. We've had almost 2 years of existence. This board has a personality. I think it's familiar enough with what's going on to know where it would like to go. So I'd like us to have a nice roadmap for where y'all are going in 2017. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done.
I would ask you to make one other thing available to us, at least the syllabus, since there are 4 attorneys on the board and we apparently don't mind beating the other 2 people to death. Would you be willing to share the syllabus from that Rhode Island, this Supreme Court opinion on campaign contributions and voting?
Yeah.
Just to, there's a,
Oh, how a tiny town did it.
yeah.
That's the name of the article.
Yeah, there's, Citizens United aside, there is some case law that suggests that you can, while you may not be able to limit campaign contributions, you can ask people to recuse themselves from decisions that they might be in a position to make as a public entity or as a public official when those decisions directly affect a major contributor to their campaign. So I thought that was an interesting counterpoint to Citizens United and something that's worthy of some discussion for folks who, since people on both sides of the aisle seem to be a little bit concerned about the impact of Citizens United.
I will send that to all board members and Mr. Currington for his benefit.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Yeah,
Mr. Friedman?
I seem to have gotten a book with junior rings. I can't turn the pages without ripping at the pins. And I really don't, and I kind of have stayed out of it for that reason.
Your problem is solved.
Good, thank you. Oh, wait a minute, almost. I'll trade you a cover insert for you. Thank you.
You get to be the chair for the next meeting, Mr. Friedman.
You're welcome.
That's okay. I'm quite happy to, because I may. It's just I started to go along with you guys and couldn't keep doing it because the pages started ripping.
I have lots of notebooks in the office.
Thank you.
Okay, so y'all have, the way I'm talking, y'all have no doubt that I'm from the South. Y'all have lots of homework for next month. I think Julie's request that we each come in with a couple, 3 ideas of things that we would like to see is probably a wise one, because it would give each of us a voice, and without overwhelming us. There obviously are a bajillion things we could consider, but that the purpose of this is not to try to resolve all issues, but just to try to move us a step forward. And I would expect that we would want to do this maybe every couple of years, as we continue to figure out who we are and what we do for a living here. That would take us through our agenda items. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns, or anything they would like to see placed on a future agenda? Seeing none, I will simply announce that our next meeting is Tuesday, November 5th, 2016, from 4 to 7 p.m. here in the City Commission chamber. Same bat time, same bat channel. And with that, we are adjourned.
That's 891-5199.